So my mother was in the Army, and she met my father, Pat Finney, in Colorado. They were both stationed in Colorado. So they got married, moved to Tennessee. My dad was an alcoholic, which she didn't really know that, but it was so. At one point, she had my sister, and then things weren't going well, so she got on a train and came to Oregon, where she grew up, and moved to Medford, where her parents, her mom, her dad, and stepmother lived. So he followed, and they got back together, and they had me in 1948. And so my dad continued, the drinking continued to be a problem. And some of my memories with him, I remember going to drive-in movies once in a while, and I can remember pretending like I was asleep when I really wasn't, so he'd carry me in, and I didn't have to walk in. We lived in a little tiny house that was 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a front room and a little kitchen. And when it rained, there were pots and bowls all over the house because the roof leaked everywhere. My sister and I had a bunk bed, and I remember I had trouble with my legs. Something was wrong with my legs. My cousin said later, I just heard not too long ago, she thought I had, now I can't think of the name, but a lack of vitamin D. So anyway, my mother would sit me cross-legged on the bed, and she would push down on my knees to help my legs straighten out. And I had little farm animals that I would play with. And so I remember that. I remember, I got bad things that I remember, but I'm sure my sister and I used to, well, I'll do the bad things first, end with the good things. But my sister was telling me not long ago, she said, you remember when you and I were sitting beside Mama, and she was reading us a story, and Daddy was across sitting in a chair with a gun pointed at Mom's head and clicking it, which pulling the trigger. So that was, I'm glad I forgot that. I remember vividly, he wouldn't let us go to the Christmas parade until we ate our liver. And I remember my sister and I both just crying and crying because we didn't want to eat our liver. I'm sure there were good times, but one time he took us and a neighbor up on Table Rock, and then my mom made him promise he wouldn't drink, but he did. And then he got actually one tire off of the cliff trying to get the car turned around to go back, and the little old lady that went with us was petrified. And anyway, that was a bad experience too. But we did, my sister and I go down to the creek, which is Bear Creek, which is a nice clean creek then, or now, but then I remember it was pretty polluted and foamy. But I think in those days it was very common for kids to just take off and go and then come back, and they weren't like watched every minute like kids do today. My mother, the sister missionaries came to our house, and in those days there were many lessons, and the conversion process went on for a long time. But she wanted to join the church, and my dad wouldn't let her. But one time when he was drunk, he said, "Oh, go ahead and join the damn church if you want to." So she did. So she was baptized, and at some point the bishop said, oh, she knew things could not stay the way they were. And so at some point she went to business school, which I think was 9 months. It was in Medford. So my sister and I stayed with my grandma and grandpa, and she went to business school. And so, because she knew at some point she would have to make a living. So she left, and I don't know how that whole process went, but we rented a little house, which I think was fairly close to the one that we had lived in. And I remember one night waking up, I don't think we'd been there very long, with these colored lights going round and round, and he had broken a window and broken in with a gun, and he was going to kill my mom. And my sister and I were sobbing, and she'd run next door to get some help. And so that was the rest of my life's not near as tragic. But anyway, so they divorced. We moved downtown. Just Medford wasn't much of a town. I mean, it was a town, but we lived on Main Street in a old apartment. It was like an old Victorian house that was made into apartments. And there was a little girl next door named, now I can't remember her name. But anyway, we played paper dolls, a lot of paper dolls. And I used to, in magazines, you could, in the back sometimes were things you could cut out and mail away for travel brochures, mainly places in the United States. And so I did a lot of those. I would mail them, and then they would send me travel brochures. And I always thought I would like to go places and do things. And so we lived there, and I started school there at Roosevelt Elementary. My mom had somebody that was supposed to watch us after school. We would go to her house after school, but she ended up not being there sometimes. And one time it was pouring down rain, and we were like huddled in a trailer, a trailer with a tarp over it. Us, my sister and I, and her kids. So Mom finally decided to take her babysitting money and buy a television. So televisions were just coming out. They were black and white. And so we were to stay home and watch TV. So we'd walk home. I was in first grade. She was in third. And we would watch TV. And she would call several times before she got home to make sure that we were okay. In the summers, we had a babysitter for, I think, 2 summers. One of them that I remember smoked in the bathroom, so that was, I think she got fired. Anyway, so I'm thinking from the time I was 3rd grade and she was in 5th grade that we stayed home alone in the summers and took care of ourselves. And she'd call a lot, and we'd walk down to the park and play or swim or whatever there was to do down there. So we moved a lot. So we moved from that house on Main Street to a little blue house on Beekman Street, or Hamilton. It was Hamilton Street. And I went back to Medford a few years ago, and I was able to didn't look for the Main Street house, but I found several of the other houses, and that was one of them. And we lived there. And so that was a different elementary school. I don't have a lot of memories there. I remember walking home one day and wondering if it was going to rain forever. I mean, I think we'd had weeks of rain and clouds, and I remember just thinking, I wonder if there's still a sun up there in the sky. I remember we had I think we had snapdragons, and we never really had like a garden because we never really had a house of our own, but that was, I think, where I started to love flowers, and I would pull up weeds that were around the snapdragons. And then we moved to Beatty Street, and that was a different school. And that's when I remember roller skating. Roller skates then were metal, and they clipped over your shoe, not the whole shoe, but there were clips. You'd kind of slide your foot in, and then you would tighten it up, and you could make them longer or shorter as your feet grew. But I would come home from school, and I would just skate up and down the sidewalk and up and down the sidewalk. And when I was at that school, we would play. I remember playing witch, and it was like really scary. It was like you were pretending you knew that person wasn't a witch, but it was like one of us would be the witch and we'd chase the others. But I remember how real it seemed. I also remember swinging, and I loved to swing. I still love to swing, but I didn't like to go too high because I've always been kind of a scaredy cat. So I was afraid that I would go over the top, and so I had to contain it a little bit. my grandparent, well, then one other house we moved to was on Beekman Street, which was back to that one school that I had gone to before. And I just remember there was a little girl down the street that I played with, and they were members of the church, LDS church, and their house was just filthy, just like the kids would pee on the mattresses and nobody ever cleaned it up. It was just smelled bad. And I remember, I don't know why, in my head, I can still see that piano in their front room, and there was a hairbrush on the piano that was so covered, so full of hair that I don't know how you'd ever brush your hair with it. But I remember one time when the mom was gone and I was there with my friend and her couple siblings, and I remember I said, let's clean house, let's clean your house. So we cleaned her house, and anyway, so somewhere at this point, there were some people in the church whose last name was Davis, and he had a brother that lived in Wairika, California, and he was single, and so they introduced him to my mom, and so he would come up every weekend, and he would stay with his brother, and then we'd go places. I remember we went to Shasta Dam once. I don't remember where else we went, but he would spend the weekend and he would go to church with us. And Don Davis was his name. And he had was called up to the minor leagues. He was in junior college, I think, was called up for baseball in the minor leagues, and then World War II started, and he went in the Navy. He had dark curly hair. I never knew him at that point, but when he came back, he was bald, and he always wore a hat. Until he met Mom, and she finally kind of convinced him that he didn't have to wear a hat all the time. But if he was out and about, he would wear a hat, and I think that's probably why he quit going to church, because he didn't want to take his hat off. And but anyway, when they started dating, he would go to church with us. I remember too in Medford, which is just a kind of a silly little story, I guess, but my teacher asked me to be Mary in the Christmas play at school, and then I guess I got asked to be Mary in the church primary play. And so I told a friend of mine at school, who was just an angel, that she could be Mary because I was already going to be Mary. And then I thought, because I think I just always tried to be kind to people. So I thought, well, I don't need to be Mary twice. She doesn't get to be Mary. So I gave her my Mary role. And then my mom told me, well, you probably shouldn't have done that because, maybe your teacher really wanted you to be Mary. And I just thought I was being nice. And then I found out that I probably maybe shouldn't have done that. But anyway, my grandma and grandpa Chetwood lived in Medford, and grandpa had arthritis really bad. So,
their names.
Goldie Chetwood, and grandpa Leif Chetwood, Leif and Goldie. So he, sometime in his 50s, had to quit work. So they were on welfare, and they always lived in little tiny houses. But at the time that I'm talking about, they lived behind a store. There's still a house there. I went back actually last summer, and there was absolutely nothing there to do for children except play Chinese checkers. So I'll play Chinese checkers with Grandma and Grandpa. I never beat my grandpa. He was very good. And I don't remember if I ever beat her or not, but she was quite heavy, and she had a big overstuffed chair that she sat in, and there was a board that she put across her chair so we could put the checkerboard on that, the Chinese checkerboard. And she also had a pump organ that she could play, and my sister and I tried to play a little bit. And so when she died, I guess her daughter, my mom was a stepdaughter, but her real daughter sold it. So I was disappointed. I was, I think, in college when she died, and because my sister and I would have loved to have had that organ. Every time we walked in the door, we'd say, "Can we have a cookie?" And my mother would say, "It's not nice to ask for cookies." And Grandma would say, "Oh, it's okay." You know, she made sugar cookies and ginger snaps, which really weren't the greatest cookies in the world, but we, you know, they were cookies, so we loved them. One thing that sticks in my mind is that it's the first time I saw The Wizard of Oz, the movie. And we were there. It was, I think, a Saturday night. It was on television. And so there were commercials. It was just going on and on. Mom says, "Well, we need to get home." And we wanted to see the end of the movie. And she said, "Well, we'll watch the end of it when we get home." And so we had to go home. And when we got home, it was over. Was devastated, and she was devastated too because she felt bad. And in those days there were no, you know, you couldn't buy it or anything. It just was, you know, it was just gone. So anyway, that was like a little bit traumatic. One thing I remember, my grandma had I think she'd had a stroke and it affected her voice. So she kind of talked like, "I'm going to the store today," and that was how her voice was, but it was just the way she was, you know. So one day I remember I took a friend to Grandma's house, and as we were walking out, well, I walked out the door and down the path to the car, and she said, what's the matter with your grandma's voice?" And I just looked at her like, "What do you mean?" You know, that's the only voice I knew she had. I mean, just never, I was just kind of shocked that anybody would think there was something wrong with her voice. But I think children are so unjudgmental, and they just accept people that love them and the way they are. So, but I remember that. And they were, like I said, on welfare. So as I remember, we got $1, I think, for Christmas. She would give us $1, which I figured out long ago, or not long ago, I was thinking about it, actually was, you know, quite a bit in those days. A couple other things. My mom did the bulletin. And so and we didn't have a car at the time, so every Saturday night, we would walk to church, and it was an old mimeograph machine, so she'd type it on this special paper and put it on this big drum, and you'd have to go like this, and each time you turned it, a sheet would come out. So we did that every Saturday night for a long time. One sad thing, we had a mother-daughter. Mothers didn't work in those days very often, and so we did these samplers, which we had to embroider these little things, and then we were supposed to get together with our mothers and frame them. So I went to church, and everybody's mother was there but mine, and this one mother said, "Well, I'll help you," and she, you know, was just busy with her own daughter, and I finally just left, and I walked home, and I cried because I didn't have a mother there. And I know that my mom felt bad about it. There just really wasn't, there wasn't a choice. It just had to be. I remember she had a good friend named Alona Jensen, and her husband had died. So I think she had 4 kids. And I remember one time we went camping with them on the coast, and we didn't even have a tent. We just laid on the beach and slept. We didn't have sleeping bags either. So I guess we just used blankets. And actually, you know, I think where we camped wasn't right on the beach. I think it was a river that ran into the ocean. Because I remember the morning we woke up, this guy walked by and said that there had been a bear there the day before, but we didn't get eaten. The other thing, and we'd gone with Alona and her kids up by Jacksonville. It's called Apple Creek, I think. Anyway, it was a creek. And so her little boy drug my towel through this poison oak, and I dried off on it with the towel, and I had poison oak all over my body. It was in my ears, it was in my nose, it was in my eyes. I was caked with it. And she took me to the doctor, and so I don't think that they even gave me anything for it, but he told her to bathe me in Fels naphtha soap. And if it wasn't better in a couple of days, then I was going to go in the hospital. So I had to stay with my grandma when she worked, and my grandma didn't even know who I was, because I was just, my whole face, everything was swollen and red and itchy. And so for years after that, I was just scared to death if I saw poison oak. I was just so frightened of ever getting that again. And I did get a few times, when you're pregnant, you can't take anything for it either. And I had it a few times when I was pregnant, but it never got that bad again. There were things that you can put on it that helps, but it's another wonderful Medford memory. We camped. I remember camping when my mom was with my dad at Union Creek, which I haven't been back to since. But all I remember is there was a tree limb that you could sit on and kind of go up and down. So that was about the extent of vacations in that time of my life. So my mother she was still dating Don Davis, and nothing was happening. There was always a reason why they couldn't get married. And so she just thought, I have to get away from this. So we packed up a car and drove to Medford, to Salt Lake. And we stayed with a lady that my aunt knew that had lived in Springfield. She was a member of the church. Her name was Mary Anderton. But she was really weird. I hate to even have this in in memory, but she communicated with space people. And my mom was so embarrassed that she even got sucked into this. But she said, because when we moved there, she and Mom slept in the same bed. And Mom said, well, she would say, do you feel that? And she said, I felt something. And she said, that's this space person that she communicated with. Anyway, I remember one night she said that the Russians were going to attack. So we had sheets and blankets and everything over all the windows because of the radiation that was going to happen, which didn't happen. But that was a false alarm. But I remember going out inside with her, and she'd say, do you see that star? It looks like a star, but it's moving. And that's the spaceship. And now I'm thinking it's probably a satellite. I think we had satellites then at that time. But anyway, at some point, well, what happened? That we got our own apartment, and we lived upstairs. We'll come back to Mary in a minute, but we moved upstairs in a house on the lower avenues in Salt Lake. And I think it was G Street, but I'm not sure. I've been back by there. There was a little grocery store next door. And he owned the house. His daughter lived downstairs. We lived upstairs. And it was just a bed. I think there was just one bedroom and a small kitchen and a bathroom. And my mom, I don't think there were two bedrooms. I think she must have slept in, wasn't really even a front room, but I think she slept in there. And the guy next door is a tiny little store, but he had a little meat counter in the back, and he would give Mom ham hocks, and she'd make split pea soup. It was so good. And the other thing I remember eating was Betty Crocker it was called pudding cake. I don't think they even make those mixes anymore, but I thought they were the best thing that ever happened. But I was 11-ish, 10, 11, and I was into watching American Bandstand, and I would look in the mirror and pretend like, all of these singers loved me, and even though I was young, I was just like, boy crazy at an early age. We weren't there too long, and then we moved on First Avenue in an apartment There was a common washing machine area downstairs. It was an old wringer washer, and then we could hang up clothes down there. I was very tall for my age, so my friend Joan Emmer and I were the tallest people in class. And one time the teacher lined us up, and I was mortified. And just in the last couple of years, I realized why. Because if you listen to 50s and 60s music, it's all about little darling, little Susie, little this, little that. And being tall was just not the way to be. You know, all the cute girls were little, according to the music. So I think, even though I didn't realize it at the time, I think that affected my self-esteem. In school, I remember a boy that moved in right from Germany, and he didn't know a word of English, but it didn't take him long. I remember one time getting in trouble because the boys were bugging us for some reason, and then the teacher said something like, well, take care of it yourself, or something like that. So I kicked him the next time he bothered us, and then I got in trouble for kicking him, which I thought was not right. But I was the tetherball champion of the school, and so that was my claim to fame. Church, there was an old LDS church there. We had primary in the afternoons, and my big memory is because we had an opening exercises, and then we walked to our classes. And so when I was walking out of the chapel and starting to go down the hall, the primary president just grabbed me by my dress and chewed me out for talking, which I was doing. But I really never wanted to go back. I did, because I knew I should, but I didn't want to go back again. And it's been kind of a lesson in, we need to discipline, but we need to do it with love, and especially at church. Because if I hadn't had a supportive family, I probably would never have gone back. I think I had my first job, I babysat, and I think I was only 10. A lady that did a child's TV program, and she had 2 little kids. And then there was babysat for another lady. Anita U. Darby was either her name or the baby's name. I think the mother's name was Anita U. Darby, and both my sister and I babysat for them. We didn't have a lot of money. I remember we used plastic bags for our boots when we had to walk somewhere. Mom was really into health food, so we always had a bowl of wheat berries on the table, and we would just chew them. And she'd also put them in a thermos, pour boiling water over it, and tighten it up, and then it would be cooked for the next morning. So we ate a lot of wheat cereal and rice cereal. She'd cook rice, and we'd put a little bit of butter and cream on it, brown sugar. It was great. When we moved from Salt Lake, Mom was cleaning out the closet, and I had stuffed a bunch of canned goods in there for a emergency preparedness food storage. And she was kind of aggravated, because it was the only time I remember getting help from the church was at Christmas. They brought us a little box, and we were having a tough time. And I remember Mom cried, because it was, I think she had finally asked maybe for some help, and it just wasn't enough. And that's when we decided to move back to Oregon. I was a good writer, cursive. I remember the teacher there showed my paper to the whole class as the way it should be done. So back to Mary. So Mary, before we left, I had gone there to her house after school, and I can't remember why, because I don't think I usually did that, but I was there I don't know why. But so I was probably 11. She was sitting at her sewing machine, and she was just pounding on it, and she was just in this kind of trance state. And I got up to leave because I was kind of scared. And she said, if you leave, the space people will pick you up and torture you, and then they'll put you back down. You won't remember all of the torture. And so I was scared, so I stayed. And so when Mom picked me up, I told her about it. And so that was the last time that I was ever there alone. And she ended up finding someone as crazy as she was to marry. They were both into the space people. And so we didn't really have much to do with her after that. But that goes on to kind of a spiritual experience that I had, even through, for years, I just didn't want to hear stories about being possessed or people talking. Sometimes people in church would be talking about, being overcome with this evil spirit or something. And I just didn't want to hear anything about that at all. So when we moved to Springfield, I was 13, I got my Patriarchal Blessing. And President Mortensen, I believe was his name, he didn't know me, he didn't know my story, I didn't know him, but he gave me a blessing, and in that blessing it says, I promise you that Satan and his angels will never have power over you. And it was just such a comfort. It was like bricks taken off my shoulder from this child that was always afraid that, something like that was going to happen. And I never worried about it after that. That he didn't know me, he didn't know anything, what I was going through, and yet he knew that I needed that blessing. My mom worked for the presiding bishop of the church at the old church office building. And so one day she told him that we decided to move back to Oregon because she just couldn't make it financially. And he said, well, Irene, we could have given you a raise. And but by then it was too late. We'd already kind of decided to go. So we drove back. And I remember I rode, and I think she was pulling a trailer. I don't know where she got the trailer. Must have rented it. And I didn't even have a place to sit. I was up in the back window on stuff that was stacked up. And we stopped to get gas at one point, and this guy at the gas station said, boy, you got a lot of guts, lady. And if you go from Burns to Bend, you go up 2 passes. One's called Drinking Water Pass, and one is Stinking Water Pass. And with what we were pulling, the car just kept going slower and slower. And you go around a bend, and there's just another bend and another bend. I thought, if we're going any slower, we're going to start rolling right back down that mountain. But anyway, made it. Stayed with my Aunt Juanita. My Aunt Juanita lived, I'm sure, in the city limits, but she had no bathroom. We were there till Mom got a job. She got a job, but it was like 6 weeks before she got a job and got paid. So we were there for the summer, and so the outhouse faced the neighbor's house, and I was 11, I turned 12 that summer, and so I was 12 thinking I was 14. But the boy next door, who was a teenager, was having a party one night, and I had to go to the bathroom. So you're going out there with your flashlight, and the whole party can see, that you're going to the bathroom. It was just embarrassing. Had to take a bath in the kitchen in a tub. And the other thing I remember is every night my aunt would use probably a half a can of mosquito spray, and just the air was just blue to kill all the mosquitoes. There are not many. Mosquitoes aren't a problem in Western Oregon now, but then they were. Every night you'd go to bed, get up, and start hitting mosquitoes. But anyway, that was miserable. But anyway, it was nice of them to let us stay there, and the house wasn't even it was like wood and tar paper on the outside of the wood, but there's no siding on the outside of the house or anything. My Uncle Harvey I adored. He wasn't much of a worker. He had a job, and I think he worked hard at his job, but he did not work hard at home. So the house just never changed, and at some point they moved out of there. But we were there, moved to a house on Kelly Street in Springfield, and I went to Hamlin Junior High. We were very active in church all of this time, and I was at a stage where I thought I just really wanted to be popular. All the popular kids had more fun, and it was just like this crazy desire thing. But I wasn't in that group, and that was so we were there a year and a half, and at least that first year when school was out, I would walk to my Uncle Lee and Aunt Nora's house, and they were just awesome. They just lived a few blocks from the school, and my mom had me go over there. And I'm glad I got to do that because they were really nice to me. They'd always give me something to eat, and they were just sweet, gentle, really gentle.
Last name?
Chetwood. So Lee Chetwood and his wife Nora. They were wonderful to me, and I'd never been around him much before, so that was a sweet thing. Then we moved again. So we moved to Thurston on the east side of Springfield in a little 2-bedroom, 1-bath house and a kitchen, little front room. We had plastic curtains, which I thought looked wonderful. East Springfield was kind of the lower class place next to Eugene, and then East Springfield was the lower class part of Springfield. So we lived in the lower class of the lower class. But everyone else pretty much was in the same boat at Thurston High School. I had a couple of friends, one friend that had a really, a nice house, but the rest of us pretty much lived in, not so great houses. So I didn't feel like I was any different. Twyla and I worked. We picked beans. She was always better than me. I tried really hard. I learned another life lesson there. I had a friend that would come pick, and she would just kind of fool around. They'd stop at noon and go swimming. And I thought, well, I'm working hard, so I'm going to have nicer clothes than she has. And then she won a $100 gift certificate from the Bon Marché, which was a lot of money in those days for clothes. And I thought, that's not fair. I've been working, she has not, and she gets more money than I do. But that's just sometimes the way it is. But we did work hard, and we babysat. We picked strawberries right after school was out. No sunscreen. There was no sunscreen. So we would just get bubbly burnt all over our face, our back, our neck, and just were miserable for a couple weeks. And, now we know that can cause skin cancer, but hopefully, I don't know, but it was just the way it was. We'd go out in the sun all day after spending all winter covered up. And then we'd pick beans, which offered us some shade. One day, I think I only lasted a day, of stringing beans. So you would have a big ball of twine, and there was a wire at the top of the bean and a low one at the end, and you were going up and down, and I got so sick. I just couldn't do it. But I did good. I worked hard at beans and babysat and picked strawberries, and that's how we made our money, so that we'd had clothes. Twyla was a much better saver than I was. She saved most of her money, and I spent most of mine on clothes. So anyway, so when I'd moved to Thurston, of course, every time you move, you don't have any friends for a while, but I didn't. And then one day I found myself in the in crowd, and That was kind of another lesson too, because I remember one time they kind of decided to ostracize this girl that was in the group, and they just kind of circled up and wouldn't let her in. And I didn't do anything about it. And I feel really bad till this day that I didn't get out of there, and go be her friend instead of staying with these girls. And most of them were nice, and I don't remember that they made fun of people or anything, but that event right there has stuck with me. The other negative thing that stuck with me, in the 9th grade, I was voted pep club president, and so we had a big initiation, and we had it in the cafeteria, and there was, I don't know, they cooked spaghetti, and it was Halloween time, so it was supposed to feel like brains, and so we had all of this stuff. Anyway, it was over, and everybody left, and we had to clean up. We really did try to clean up the mess. So it was me, and then, I don't know, it seemed like there were 4 or 5 of us that were on the, in the leadership of that pep club. So we cleaned what we thought was good, but it wasn't. The next day it looked horrible. But anyway, we found that we were alone at the school. All of the advisor had gone home. Everybody had gone home but us. We were there all by ourselves. And so we decided to go in the teacher's room, because that's a place you could never go. So it wasn't locked, so we went in there. And there were donuts there, like 2 boxes, as I remember, of donuts. Obviously now, I think, for the next day's teacher meeting in the morning. But for some reason, we decided it would be okay to eat some donuts. And I thought, I was not a thief. I knew the difference between right and wrong. But I ate donuts that didn't belong to me. And then we decided it would be okay to go in the office and look in the files and see. We had to do this IQ test, but they would never tell us what it was. So I wanted to see what my IQ was. So I thought that would be fine to look and do that. So I did. So lesson, I was a girl that always tried to be good and do the right thing. And yet I was with a group, and we didn't do the right thing. It's been a lesson to me that sometimes good kids do things that aren't okay. I don't know why. In my mind, I rationalized that it would be okay to eat those donuts, because really it was stealing. And did I have the right to go in and look in somebody's files? No, it wasn't okay. So I guess when you have kids, maybe realize that sometimes even good kids do bad things, and they're not bad people. They just make a mistake. So I stayed there through my junior year. Girls camp. I went to girls camp, church girls camp. Loved the firesides. I never had the stamina that most kids have. I was always down at, the lower part of the hike up the mountain with the heavy girls. And I wasn't heavy, but I just never had the lung power. But we didn't exercise in those days either. We didn't, we would walk to school. I took the bus to school. We had PE, but other than that, it was not, we didn't really work out like people do today. So that might have helped. So Mom got married. We moved to Wairika. And again, I didn't have any friends. Ate lunch by myself for a couple of weeks. But I finally got friends, and I was not in the in-group, and it was actually such a relief. I just felt like, nobody, I knew my friends liked me for who I was. Nobody was going to ostracize me and decide I wasn't going to be in the group. So another lesson learned. We lived on the top of, I think, Minor Street, but it was kind of a weird house. Whoever built it, you had to walk through my bedroom to get through the bathroom. And so it was odd. So we didn't stay there very long. Then we moved on Washington Street. So I remember talking about religion one time at lunchtime. And so I asked my friends if they would like to meet with the missionaries, and so they said yes. So we had one meeting, as I remember, with the missionaries, and it seems like there were 5 or 6 or 7 kids there, and nothing ever came of it. I didn't think until I went to my 10-year reunion and found out that one of the girls had joined the church. And I said, well, how'd you get, acquainted with the church? She said, it was that meeting you had with the missionaries. So she had, that had stuck away in her mind. And so it made a difference in somebody's life. This was Vietnam War era days, and lots of conversations about, was it right or was it wrong? And so I remember those kinds of talks. I don't know if I just said I dated quite a bit. And I would call this a spiritual experience, actually. I went out with this guy he was a senior class president. I was a junior. And I didn't know him well, but we went to a movie. It was the only thing to do in town. There was a movie theater, and every Saturday a dance. But so instead of taking me home, we went to get something to eat. There was one place where you can get hamburgers and that. And then he started heading out of town, and we went down this long road, and there were no houses. It was just like forest. And I kept saying, "Where are we going? Where are we going?" And he wouldn't say anything. And I think I said, I want to go home. And he just kept going. And I was getting scared. And then he hit a deer. I was so glad. So I just have always felt that God sent that deer there to stop that car, because then, it dented his car all up and it was drivable. So he took me home. But I don't know what would have happened had he not hit that deer. It was kind of scary. So I really did love it there. I enjoyed school. I enjoyed friends and people in my classes. And so the summer I worked at Penny's. My boyfriend, off and on boyfriend, his father managed Penny's. I'm sure that's why I got the job. But in my senior year, the middle of my junior year, I started looking for work, and I think it was my senior year, and he hired me. So I worked upstairs, and then sometimes I was on the floor selling things, and sometimes I was in the basement taking new shipments in. Everything was done by hand then, and things had to be, these tickets had to be put on them and everything. And so it was a good job. There weren't many jobs in Wairika, so it was a good job for me. But that summer I was working, and I got a call from Mom saying that we called him Papa, had been in an accident. And so it was close to closing time. But anyway, they let me go. Mom picked me up. We went to the hospital. And this nurse came out and said, Mrs. Davis, your husband has been critically hurt. We don't expect him to live. But if he does, we'll take him to Medford. So they took him to Medford. And we drove, I think, behind that ambulance. I can't remember for sure. But she and I went, and oh, he was driving a lumber carrier. 2 lumber companies used the same little road, and he was driving a lumber carrier. There was someone that came up behind him with a forklift, and the forklift caught on to his lumber carrier, and it flipped it off the road, and it rolled over on his head. So his main injuries were head injuries. So anyway, at the hospital again, they said they didn't expect that he would live. She didn't leave the hospital for 2 or 3 weeks, never left. And I don't know if she prayed him to stay alive. He did live. He lived. At some point, an attorney came up and said, I think we need to start a lawsuit, because he gave him a life expectancy of maybe 20 years. She said he could live 20 years like that, and you're going to need money to take care of him. So she signed the papers and they started a lawsuit. He did live 20 years. And anyway, when she went back to, and so at some point then I went ahead, I was going to stay, but she said, no, you're going to BYU. It was time for me to go to college. She said, I want you to go. So I did. So at some point they wanted to transfer him to Eugene because they had a better department, neurological department. And so she went back down to Wairika to pack up. Went to church, and a friend said, I can't believe you. You couldn't wait to see if he lived or died before you tried to get every penny you could out of him. It's like she went after this lawsuit, which she didn't. And another lesson in life that sometimes people are really mean. We just have to be careful what we say to people. And, you know, especially in a church situation, there just should never be things said like that. And some people just, you know, drive people away by what they say and what they do. And so I was alone there. I stayed with some people I had babysat for some, and then, you know, some nights I stayed alone. But it was, as I remember, he was hurt the end of July, and I was only there another probably 4 or 5 weeks. And then that was the last, you know, when I went to come home from BYU, she was in Eugene. So that was the last of my living in Wairika. I never really got much of a chance to say goodbye to anybody, or, you know, it was just what it is. So I wanted to change a little bit and talk a little bit more about my mom and Papa, as we called him, Don. He was just very quiet. He was shy. He had lived alone for many years, and he was not like real huggy. You know, I knew he cared about us and probably loved us, but I don't remember that he. I know that one guy that I went out with said he had a friend. When he called the house, he said, I want you to listen to this guy. I guess my dad sounded really gruff on the phone. He didn't really particularly want me to date, I think is basically what it was. So he wasn't very overly friendly on the phone. He always wore a hat at work, and if he was out, didn't wear one in church. He wore the same, he always wore these pennies, little blue checked shirts and jeans. It was just like when something wore out, you went and bought the exact same thing that you had before, whereas women tend to they wanted something different. But he wanted the same shirts, the same jeans, the same boots. But anyway, he was, you know, a part of our life for a long time, and he was just very, very quiet. Mom was always positive. When I think about all the stuff that she went through in her life, I really don't remember her complaining or whining about things, or she had a very strong testimony of the gospel. Church meant a lot to her. We always went. Wherever we were, if we were visiting relatives, they knew that we were going to go to church. She had a really horrible complexion when she was young, and she had these bumps on her face, which I've got one right here, which is kind of what she had, quite a few on her face. Later in life, she had some kind of dermabrasion or whatever. They kind of toned that down a little bit. But so she had been made fun of a lot, and so she was very, very conscious that Twyla and I didn't make fun of people, and that we were always kind to people, because she always was. I don't remember her gossiping or saying bad things about people ever. She took care of Papa for 20 years. A lot of that time, I'm not sure the exact number of years she had him at home. She had to tube feed him so many times a day. She had to turn him every couple hours, day and night. He couldn't respond. He was awake and asleep, but there was he was like in a comatose state. well, it was brain damage, and she just took care of him for a very long time. She adored her 16 grandchildren. They were the light of her life, and whenever she did end up remarrying and took Papa with her. He was in a nursing home there. She went up at least twice a day, every day, until he finally passed away. Every time the kids went over, she would have, play dates set up, and Grandpa would take them. She married Malin Couch, and he was their grandpa then from then on, and he would take them on little excursions and take them to see places around Bend, and it never occurred to me that we might be kind of a bother for him, because she would always say, oh, do you have to go? I thought you were going to stay one more day. And I think afterwards they probably breathed a sigh of relief that we were gone. But they had a 3-bedroom house and a family room, and here I come with 6 kids, but they were always gracious, and it was a fun place to go. It was our vacation. Well, first of all, I got a scholarship, which I would probably not even get in today, but so I went. I did not know a soul in the state of Utah, but I lived in the dorms in Helaman Halls, and there was a cafeteria. My first roommate I should have stuck with, but she was not, I wanted to go do more things than she wanted to do, and so at some point we kind of switched roommates, and then the new one's name was Bonnie. The first one was Marilyn, and the second one, she was almost 2, wanting to do stuff, and there were times I needed to study, and I remember one night sleeping in the janitor's closet on that floor because I just needed to get some sleep. And but at the end of that year, and I was majoring in what was then called home economics education, because I got a scholarship from the California Home Economics Association. So I thought, well, that's what I'll do. So the second year, the end of that first year, everybody was kind of teaming up, and to move off campus, and I didn't seem to, I didn't want to ask someone, can I stay with you? Because I was kind of shy. And anyway, at some point, there was a girl that was a year older than me, and she said, I have these friends, I'm going to stay with them. Do you want to? So I decided to do that. So move off campus to a place called Mettler Manor. And so when I got there, I found out she wasn't coming at all. I was the first one there, and then the only one I knew wasn't going to be there. But I met some friends for life, and we still today have started getting together again. And we got together last summer, and we're going to get together again this summer. But Dolly, Pat, and Julia. And then my friend Marianne from Oregon moved in, I think my second year there. So that was just fun. We got along very well. We cooked together in some of those apartments. The kids don't really cook, but we cooked together. And I think that last year I was there, I had a job cooking for an apartment of boys that lived next door. I think I got $5 a week, which doesn't seem hardly worth it. My first experience with a garbage disposal, I've always been a little afraid of garbage disposals. I just have visions of my hand slipping and getting chopped to pieces. So I always try to just put the stuff in and then turn it on. So those first 3 years were kind of, I guess, uneventful. I loved BYU. I loved the social life. I loved the teachers and the religion classes, and there was always something to do, and I loved my roommates. In those days, it seemed like it was not really cool to go to concerts and stuff with girls. If you didn't have a date, you just didn't go, in our minds. So I remember one night a roommate and I snuck in after it started and sat on the steps of the auditorium or whatever and listened, and then we left before it was over. So today, that was just stupid. And today, I think, you just go and you do whether you have a date or not. But that was kind of at least our mindset at the time. He was in our ward. I was teaching Sunday school with his roommate, who Dean knew. Well, I don't know. There was a connection there. But anyway, one day it was pouring down rain, and we had to walk to church and back. And I remember my roommate and I coming up to the door, and it was just pouring buckets. And here comes Dean. So I was pretty shy, but I said, "Hey, could we get a ride?" And he said, "Sure." And so he dropped us off. I got in the house, and I had his scriptures. I had picked up his scriptures that were sitting in the back seat. He had a little Volkswagen, and so I called him up and said, "I have your scriptures. I'll bring them over." And he said, "Oh, that's okay. I'll come get them." And so anyway, he did at some point come get them, and then he asked me to a Christmas concert or something, some kind of Christmas thing, and so we did that. So then home for Christmas break. We dated then that spring pretty exclusively, and I think we went home at spring break in March, and his uncle was a jeweler in Philomath, Oregon, so we had him picked out engagement rings, and I don't remember how we really got engaged. We just started talking about it some way, and so we got engaged in the spring, and then when we were married the first part of September. And my mom had bought a new car, so she got this free, we were married in the Oakland Temple, and she got a free hotel at this resort. So we had a couple nights there, and a lesson on eating out. We were going to eat out at this place somebody recommended, and it was just packed, and we thought, oh, can't wait in that line. So this place across the street doesn't have a line at all. We'll go over there. And it really wasn't very good. So that was our lesson, that if there's a line, it's probably because the food is good. So the first year, we both went to school together, and we lived in a basement of an older house in Provo. The older couple, I don't remember their names now. I know they were, I'm sure they're dead now, but because they were really old. The next year, and the apartment had pipes running here and there, and it was just a basement is what it was, with one bedroom, a bathroom, a kitchen, and maybe a little tiny front room area. And every night we watched this, I think it was called It Takes a Thief, because it seemed like every night we'd watch that, and then when it was time to go to bed, it was like 11:11, so that was kind of our little code. So I graduated at the end of that year, and I had been student teaching in Payson, Utah, and they were needing another teacher, so I got the job. I don't think they even interviewed me. I went in and they just said, "Well, you've got the job." So, and as I remember, I think I brought home $500 a month, $500 a month. So I taught foods classes, and I taught, I think it was called home living or family living or something like that. And I taught sewing. The teacher I worked with, her name was Mrs. Little, and she was great. I did my best. I made some mistakes. I guess they usually did a dinner, lunch thing for all the teachers, so I did that. And I didn't count on the chicken. We had baked chicken that the more you put in the oven, the longer it takes. So they were cutting into chicken that was kind of bleeding, and that was very embarrassing. I don't remember what else we had. I just remember the chicken. I remember that we had mice in the kitchen, and one day the meat cutter from town came to do a talk and demo, and he was up there. I was kind of sitting in the back, and I looked over, and this mouse was running across the stove in one of the counters. And the kids didn't see it, but I saw it. I had to put traps out, and then I'd catch a boy in the hall when I'd come to work and have him check the traps because I didn't like to deal with little mice. One thing I learned there, I had a club of girls, and so we had a Christmas party for the Head Start children, and so the kids got gifts and wrapped them, and one little boy, he kept carrying around this wrapped ball, and his teacher said, tell the girls not to feel bad, but he's never had a present before, so he doesn't want to unwrap it here. It was obviously a ball. So there were a couple kids that were absent that day, little kids, and so one day, not long after that, when we had an assembly, I grabbed a couple of the girls and we took their presents to them, and it was Payson was not, I don't know what it looks like today, but then it was a very, very small town, and some of the kids came from outlying communities, but so we went to this what looked like a triplex, and the stairs in between. They went upstairs and they delivered these packages, and when they came down, they said, we didn't know people lived like this around here. And I've never forgotten that, because sometimes we can live right in the midst of poverty and we don't even see it. Those girls had grown up in that town, had lived there all their lives, and they didn't even see that there were poor people that lived there. So I think we all need to be mindful of that. So I taught there 2 years, and then I was pregnant before I finished that school year, and Dean graduated, and he had a job interview in Milwaukee, Oregon, which is up by Portland, and then he had an interview in the Eugene area. So we were driving from Milwaukee to Eugene, and we saw this Albany sign, and he said, I wonder if they might have a job here. So we pulled off there, and he came out of there with a job. So that's how he was teaching woodshop at Calapooya Middle School. And so actually had Dawn in Eugene because my sister knew a good doctor there, so she was born in Eugene. We were living in Albany. So I'll talk more about family later, but when my kids were all in school, I started substituting a little bit, mainly at West Albany High School. And that's where my kids were at school, so I got to where I really tried hard to learn names, and one time I heard a kid say, how does she know my name? But if there was a seating chart, I would sit there and I would, if the kids were working, I would memorize names, and I worked really hard at that. So I was called a lot, and I worked once. Dawn was going on a mission, and I knew that we would like to go pick her up. I started working as much as I could, and I really enjoyed substituting. I enjoyed mostly working at that one school, because once the kids knew I knew them, I very rarely ever had a bad day. It was interesting, and it was a little bit, never knowing whether you were going to work or not. So I just got to where I got up every morning and got dressed as if I was going to go to work. And if I didn't, then it was just a stay-at-home day. But during those years, I started working on my master's degree at Oregon State. You had 7 years to complete it, and they were changing rules in Oregon where you had to have a master's to teach in high school. So I just took a class or two every summer, and it took me the whole 7 years. I had to do a project at the end, and I just struggled with the what should I do, and I didn't know, how I was going to get it done, and it finally just came to me what to do, and I just banged it out in a couple of days. So it wasn't anything that I felt like I needed to make myself feel like a more intelligent person, but it was something that I needed, and I got it done. they started this alternative school at night, and it was like from 3:45 till 8:45. And I started at a 0.16, which is not much. And then they bumped me up and bumped me up. And so by the end of the year, I think I was working full time, but I would do whatever they needed to be done. I taught English, I taught social studies, I taught foods, I taught child development, geography, well, social studies, but geography, United States history, world history. And I enjoyed it, and I think I did a good job at that. And then I've picked it up again since I've retired a little bit. I work for about 2 teachers, so I work maybe a day or two a month, and that's about it. But it was interesting, and I enjoyed it. We went to several different formats. We were at West Albany High School, and then we had a school at an elementary school that was closed down. We were there for a couple years. And then they built us a new school, I think because some of the kids were smoking in the bushes and burned down some bushes, and the neighbors didn't want us there anymore. So they decided we needed our own place. And so they built that school, and the next year we had our own school. It was awesome. I loved working there with those kids. They were a lot of kids that had poor home lives. Some of them were there. They weren't all bad kids. In fact, there weren't very many bad kids. Some kids were there because they'd had social anxiety issues. They couldn't be in a hallway with 1,200 kids. Some of them were way behind in credits for some reason or another. Sometimes it was medical reasons, and they got so behind and they could get ahead faster at our school. Some of it was disciplinary reasons. They got kicked out of school and they had to go there. But I just found that many of them came from poor homes and dysfunctional homes, and once they knew that you really cared about them, I rarely ever had any discipline problems. I'm not saying there weren't any, but it was rare. One experience that I remember, 2 experiences I'll just tell you about. I had a student named Marcos, and he would sit right in child development, right in the front. He was just staring at me the whole time, and he just acted like he was soaking it all in, and he would answer all these questions. And so one day I pulled him aside and I said, Marcos, you have got to stay after school because you're not going to pass. And he said, how can I not pass? I said, you haven't turned anything in. He just never turned anything in. I said, you have got to get something in. And so I said, I can stay any night this week. So one night he stayed, and we did this worksheet, and so it was on logical and natural consequences. And so he had to, there was a scenario there, and then he had to tell how he would handle it without physical force, without hitting a child. How can you handle these? How can you give them consequences instead of physical punishment? So he was coming up with these great ideas, and finally he just looked at me and he said, I think it's a really good thing I took this class, because when I grew up and I got in trouble, I just got whopped in the head. He says, I didn't know there was another way to do it. And I thought, here's one kid whose life is probably going to be different. His children will be raised differently than he was raised, hopefully. But that was a really good experience. I had another experience with a girl named Janelle. She and her friend entered my child development class, and they were horrible. She was terrible. She was rude. She was obnoxious. She was in there a few days. One of the things that we did is we had these cardboard cutouts of food, and on the back were the nutritional qualities, that's 100% of vitamin C and 2% of vitamin D or whatever. So they had to make 3 meals. I had lots of them. 3 meals and they had to think about the color of the food. There had to be a variation in color, texture, and have all the nutrients they needed for the day. And then, so it took them a couple days because I had a sheet for them they had to fill out with the nutrients of each one. And so they had 2 or 3 days to work on that. And then they were to put them out, in 3 different meals. And she just threw them on the table. I said, Janelle, you need to put those in breakfast, lunch, and dinner. That's good enough. She wouldn't do it. And so I went into the principal's office after school, and I said, I think you're going to have to take her out of my class. I said, I can't do anything with her. She's just, completely rude and obnoxious. And so anyway, the next day, she's still in my class, and she was a perfect angel. And when the bell rang, it was the last period of the day, I walked into his office, and I said, what did you do to her? She's like a different person. And he said, I just told her how much you cared about her, and what you thought that she was such a strong person. She was like 14 and had a baby. And what was the difference? It was just that she thought I cared about her. And she, from then on, she was great. And every time that she would come back or bring her baby into school, and if she wasn't in my class, she'd take him back to the foods area and let me talk to her. And I ran into her several months ago, and she didn't finish school, but she wants to, and I hope she will. Another thing that just popped into my mind thinking of her, I had another student that we were talking in child development, and I was about food, and I was asking them, about what they ate when they were little. And this one girl said, we just had these government beans and stuff as all we had to eat. These cans of beans and something else. And somewhere in that conversation, they lived in a trailer. And anyway, one other situation, then I'll go on. But I had a girl that we read the novel or the book Night by Wiesel, Elie Wiesel, I think his name is Wiesel. It was a German Holocaust story. So then it was an English class, and I wanted them to write a paper, an imaginative story about them risking their life for somebody. And I had one girl who was a good student, and she wouldn't do it. She said, I wouldn't risk my life for anybody. She would not. I said, well, make something up. She wouldn't do it. She would not write it. And I thought, what a cold-hearted girl, But it was the next year when she was, always nice and cooperative the rest of the time. But the next year we were talking, and she said, Mrs. Robbins, I have literally raised myself since I was 4. She used to say she was white trash, and I said, you're not white trash. Mrs. Robbins, we live in a trailer. We have no electricity. I sleep on the floor. We're white trash. But when she said that, I realized why she couldn't write that paper. Because since the time she was 4, she had to feed herself. She had to look out for herself first, or she physically would not have survived. She would not have lived. So the only way she lived and survived was by thinking of herself first. So she wasn't cold-hearted. It was just, the way things were. I had another little girl named, can't think of her name right now, but she came to us out of the state mental hospital. She had been sent to a hospital in Portland with drug addiction and ended up in the mental hospital with addiction and came to Knight High School. So they'd sent her back home, which is hard on kids who have addictions, and then they go home where everybody's drinking and smoking. But she did it. And she did it through, she wasn't LDS, but she became involved in a church. And our bishop Bishop Goetz one time said to me, he said, the people that I see with addictions, he said, the ones that can really do it are the ones that turn to Christ, turn to Jesus. And that's what she did. She became part of this church group and went on a little mission. And I saw her 5 or 6 years ago, and she's doing well. But I felt sorry for her. Holidays are a terrible time in dysfunctional families. We all look forward to Christmas and Thanksgiving, but for kids in those families, it's a horrible time because most people are drunk. I had 2 students a student and his brother, whose mother took him to the recreation station, which was a place with games and stuff, and left him Christmas Eve, never picked him up. So that's the kind of stuff that goes on sometimes in these dysfunctional houses during Christmas time. And so it was Thanksgiving, I think, and I bought her a bottle of apple sparkling cider so she'd have something to drink instead of what everybody else was drinking. But so I loved Knight High School. It was great for me. It was it's a life Albany Options now, and it's once in a while I substitute there. It's a great place. And kids, it's easy to judge kids and look at them and think, why are they doing that? I had a kid that argued with me for a long time about stealing. I mean, there are parents that teach their kids to steal. He didn't see anything wrong with taking things from a store. He would never steal from a friend, but to steal from a store is fine because they have so much stuff. And I never made any headway with the stealing issue there, but I ended up doing a half a day at Calapooya Middle School and the other half at AOS, and the schools were just a couple-minute drive from each other. Loved middle school. I taught foods classes. It's kind of a poor neighborhood, so a lot of these kids had never peeled a potato, never peeled an apple, never just wiped off a counter, never washed a dish. So we did a lot of figuring out prices of recipes. We cooked most every day, and I wrote grants so that we had enough money to do that. And if they weren't listening, we didn't cook. So I very rarely ever have a discipline problem because they knew they wanted to cook and they wanted to eat. And so I loved it. It was just fun. It was fun to go to work. My last year, there were nights when I couldn't wait to go to bed so I could get up and go to work. So what's that? That means you like your job, I guess. And so I still run into kids. I made them keep their recipes in a notebook, and it was a huge part of their grade. And I still run into students every few months. I'll see somebody at the store somewhere. I still have my recipe. My recipe book. I still use my recipes. So that's fun. I'm sure they all didn't keep them, but most of them did. Dawn was our firstborn, beautiful baby. I swore I'd never have another baby after that because nobody told me so much about the pain. And I didn't know how much it was supposed to hurt. And I had a pretty mean nurse. She wasn't very nice. And she'd come in and say, "What do you want now?" And so I tried to tough it out. But I thought, I'm not doing this again. But it wasn't long when I wanted to do it again. But Dawn is a very sweet person. I can never imagine her making fun of anybody or she was never mean in any kind of way that I can think of. She was a great first sister. Dawn was fairly quiet. When she was little, she was quite thin, and she couldn't stand anything around her waist, so her pants were always hanging down. She wouldn't wear anything tight enough to stay up, and so I finally bought her overalls. So she lived in overalls for quite a while. She's very loving and concerned about other people. When she was a good student, did very well in high school and went on to BYU. I guess she talked some about a mission, and I didn't really get it. And one day I asked her if she had signed up for her next year, and she said, "Mom, I told you I'm going on a mission." So I thought, whoa, she is. And so she went to Portugal South Mission and spent most of her time in the Cape Verde Islands, which was a great, wonderful place to be. They didn't have to track, and people just came up to them and wanted to be taught. And they were very, very busy baptizing people and trying to get people married first, and because marriage was just almost unheard of there. And so they didn't want to get married unless they had a dress, something nice. And so the sisters spent a lot of time getting people married and teaching people. And she came back and met John. I can't remember if it was her last year. I can just remember I'd call, and I'd say, "Hi, how are things going?" "Good." And he is wonderful. And they have 5 beautiful children. Their oldest, Carter, is on a mission now. Anyway, she's always concerned about other people and about other people's feelings. So Dicey has always been a leader. And I remember walking into her kindergarten room, and all the kids were around her. And Dicey, will you tie my belt or tie my apron, and will you do this? And there were like 4 or 5 kids just around her asking her to do things. And so I don't think she was more than 4 when she was 4, because I wrote it down. When Dean had a electrical apprenticeship contest at the coast in Coos Bay, I believe. So the kids stayed with my mom, and we came back Sunday morning, because it was what we did lasted really late Saturday night. So we came back, and so when we were driving home, Dicey said, "Well, what did you do for breakfast, Mom?" And I said, "Well, we ate out." And she said, "Isn't there something else you could have done?" And I thought, whoa, you learn from your children. And I thought about it, and there was something else we could have done. And so we have since then, because out of the mouth of babes comes. But now we know that if we have to travel on Sunday, we could, or that situation, we could have brought juice and bagels. And, and most motels have little refrigerators now. There's no reason why you have to go out to eat for that one meal. And maybe if you're gone for days, you have to eat out. But anyway, I've learned lots of lessons from her. And one, she's very intelligent. And one time, I think she was about 4, we went to this store, Prairie Market. It was like a store where you have these carts, like a bulk store. And I said, I can't remember now exactly how it went, but anyway, she said something about the candy being on aisle 3. And I said, "Well, where's the bread?" And she said, "Oh, it's on aisle 12 or whatever." And I went in there, and that's where it was. And I thought, I don't even know the numbers of the aisles. I didn't know where stuff was. And she, we'd been in there, not a lot, but a couple of times, and she remembered where everything was. But has always been very hardworking and very kind. She had a job at 12 cleaning house for Ida Mae Wynn. And Ida Mae said, "I've never had anyone clean for me that can clean as well as she does." So, very kind, very hardworking, great leader. Dina was very quiet. And I remember leaving her, forgetting her at church one time. I hate to admit that, but at primary, and I had to go back. Would just as soon, she had a friend, Lisa, that lived down the street that used to come over every day after school. And Dina just really wanted to sit in her room and read a book. And Lisa was over there. all the time, and very loyal to her family, great reader of books, and she still likes, it's funny how kids, their basic personality, I think, changes a little bit, but basically, Dicey's still a leader and hardworking, and Dawn's very kind, and Dina's very quiet and very thoughtful and kind too, and still loves to read books. Kelly had a temper, and she would just kind of blow sometimes when she was just little. But she is awesome, and she loves to make things. She loves to bake. She loves to create things. She's a great teacher. She teaches school. She's just probably one of the most thoughtful people I've known. She's remembers everybody's birthday. She sends cards to people. I think this is her third stint at being a Relief Society president. She wasn't very old when she was made a Relief Society president as a single in a family ward. And I was up there for a Sunday, and she just grabbed me. We got somebody to visit, we got to go visit people. So she just takes her church calling very seriously. Dicey, by the way, served a mission in southern Spain, and Kelly served in Spain, Las Palmas, in the Canary Islands. Wonderful girl. Keisha, hardworking, loving. She's another one that makes things for people and gifts for people, and works in the school system now as an aide, and I know she really loves and cares for those kids. She's, all of my kids are really loving, kind people. Keisha also is very talented as far as she makes beautiful quilts and loves flowers and gardening, and great person. Stephen served a mission in the Canary Islands partially the same time Kelly was there. He is a very loving and caring person too. He's an immigration attorney now, so he deals a lot with people who are trying to get citizenship, and people who are treated poorly and taken advantage of. And he has a big heart for these people. He's in the right profession. He's always been very loving to Dean and I as parents, and to his sisters. He's the only boy, so he grew up playing Barbies. And I bought him a Ken doll, so that helped a little bit. But he's very funny. He's just funny. And a very good, wonderful artist. He's very, very talented in painting and drawing. And just our number one fan. He loves us, and we love him, and all of their families too. I don't mean to leave out their families. So we picked up Dawn from her mission. So we went to England first, because Dean's had been there on his mission. So we stayed with some people that he had taught. And that was just an awesome experience. They took us around in their car and went to Bath and Oxford, and we went to a Les Mis play in London. Dean and I took a day or two downtown London, and it was wonderful. Then we went to Portugal, picked up Dawn, and toured Portugal. We went to Évora, we were in Lisbon, and went to Portimao in southern Portugal. Stayed with a missionary couple, an adult missionary couple that she had known. And the next big one was when Dicey finished her mission. Dean had developed MS, and he just really wasn't up to the trip. And so Dina was at BYU and wasn't really happy there at the time. And she said, what if I came home and got a job and went with you, and then I'll go to Oregon State? And I said, that sounds good. So we went to Malaga and picked up Dicey, and then we just did, as I remember, Dicey had a budget travel book. And we spent a couple days in Malaga, and then she'd look at the book and do some calling, and found a place for us to stay in Cadiz, I think is where we went next. And then we were there for a couple of days, and then she got the book out again. And so we didn't have anything set up as far as where we were going to stay days ahead of time. We just went. And so we were in Cordoba and Sevilla and Cadiz and Malaga. And I think those were basically the four places. We took a high-speed train from one of those places to Madrid and flew out of Madrid. We went to church in Madrid, and I remember there were a lot of Iranian people there. And so we asked them, and it came basically from one Iranian convert who joined the church, and then he was bringing his family over. So there were quite a few Iranian people in that. And they were in the midst of starting the Madrid temple, I think, at that time. So that was a thrill. So my son, Stephen, married Oksana, who's from Ukraine. So last year, 2017, in the spring, he said, we're going to Ukraine and Italy. Would you like to go? Yes. So that was amazing. Oksana speaks Ukrainian, Russian. And so she was with us. We were either with a guide or with her, and her mother and the baby came. So Ukraine's a beautiful country, and the architecture is, we just don't have anything that old here, so it was just great. One of the highlights to me was, just before I'd left, I'd watched this program on TV about the Nazi invasion of Ukraine, and there was a place where there was a ravine, and they had lined up tens of thousands of Jews and just slaughtered them, killed them, and they were interviewing the guy who had done the shooting, or it was a film of him, had done some of the shooting, and it was just horrific. And so Stephen and I went on this tour, and we went there, and it was just, I couldn't believe I was at that place. And they had evergreen shrubs that were pruned down like they were hanging in sadness for what had gone on in that ravine. And I just thought, I know I was inspired to turn on the TV, and that show would be on, and that I would be there in that place in a matter of weeks was, just a blessing to see that. But that was, we took a sleeper train across Ukraine to the western Ukraine, and that was just a thrill to me. I mean, just riding on a train where you go to sleep in bed and travel, it was so fun. But we saw beautiful things and wonderful people. I would say, in all of these travels, people have, at least these countries in Ukraine and Italy, people were very kind and helpful, and so we went from there then to Italy, went to Rome and visited Rome and Pompeii, and then went down to Naples and Capri. Wonderful guides that just picked us up in the morning and took us. Stephen had it all planned out, and so there was no, getting lost or what are people saying, and because they spoke great English and could translate, and so it was wonderful. The Vatican was a very wonderful experience. There was a very good, sweet spirit there, I thought, and all of the statues of the apostles and what they went through, and suffered for the sake of Christianity, for keeping the life of Jesus alive. They gave their lives, and so that was beautiful. Pompeii was huge. It was, I don't know, not anything like I expected. The streets were still there, the shops were still there, because it was covered with ash. It wasn't really destroyed. Some of it was destroyed, but it was a very moving place. And Capri was just beautiful. And anyway, I think Rome was probably my favorite, because there were so many buildings and things erected to remember Christianity, although some of it was, slave labor, and that was a really sad part of, I know, lots of lives lost in the Colosseum, where people found it entertaining to watch people kill each other, which is a horrible thing to think about. But I am grateful to them for that opportunity of something that I always wanted to do, to travel, and never thought I would ever have the means to be able to do that. But I've seen some places, and it's just so exciting to me. I've gone, I think, twice to Victoria. With Kelly, the first year, Kelly and Dina, and we were only there a couple of days, and Claire, Dina's little girl, had leukemia, had a turn for the worse, and so we just had to pack up and go home. And so the lady who owned the apartment offered to let us come back, and she would give us our other 2 nights. So we went back, and Dicey came with us. So we had Dicey and Kelly and I and Dina, and she brought her daughter Malia. And we went to Butchart Gardens, which was beautiful, and it's just an architecture and a place. It's just like not very far, but it's a different country, and it's beautiful and interesting. And their natural museum, British Columbia National Museum, I think it's called. I could have stayed all day there. It was just so interesting, and actually some uplifting things, some Native American sayings that were so profound and beautiful. And anyway, it was a great place. Starting Tennessee, which was, I don't know, maybe 20 years ago.
More like
30. Time flies. My real dad was in Tennessee, and he wasn't doing well, and we had a cousin that wanted Twyla and I to come out, and so we did. And we met all these relatives that were great people, and it was good, because I thought, I looked at him as just kind of this drunk that never could get his life together, but his family was awesome, and so it made me feel good to know that they were wonderful people. And then we went back a year or 2 later for his funeral. The doctor told us when we went in to see him, he said, "Your father has literally liquefied his brain with alcohol." So he died really a bum, on the street, which my mom said when he didn't drink, he had a great personality. But I think his family had started giving him drinks when he was just a little kid, and so it just was. Some people can probably handle it, and he just couldn't. So he certainly paid a heavy price for that. I've taught primary. I've been in the primary presidency. I've taught little kids and older kids, and it's generally been great. I love working in primary. I've had challenges with one class when I actually was just about in tears, and I just thought I can't stay. So I got somebody, and they took over my class for me, and because they were so bad. And several of them showed up at my doorstep with their parents that afternoon apologizing. But they were much, much better after that. But primary is a fun place to be. I have taught Relief Society classes. I've been in charge of activities. I've been Relief Society president twice, I think. It's the part I don't like about being president is visiting teaching. My personality wants to finish something and then go do something else, and that's the way I even clean house. I clean this room, I vacuum, I water the plants, I dust, and then I go to this room. But so I want to fix visiting teaching and have it perfect, and then I will go on and do something else. But it never stays perfect because somebody moves or somebody doesn't like somebody or whatever. And so, or somebody works, and so it's, anyway, I have a counselor right now that said, oh, I would love to do that. And I said, okay. I looked in the handbook and decided it was okay. So, but Relief Society is a great organization in the church, and it's really there because I think we don't have a paid clergy, so we don't have someone that can go visit all the sick people and keep, it's not a full-time job, so we all do our part, and we split up visiting teaching and 2 by 2, or if need be by ourselves, we take care of things, so it takes the load off of the bishop or the branch president. Girls camp. Girls camp is great. The last time I went, I think I thought, well, I think I'm done. But it's run different years. But I love to go, particularly if my girls were there. And it's much funner if they're there than if they're not. But it's a great program. And that's all I have to say about Girls Camp. I don't think I'll go again, but Young Women's I've done off and on, and again, it's great. And one thing that clicks in my mind is an experience I had when I took the girls to Pittock Mansion in Portland, and then we were going to go to the mall, Washington Square Mall, and then we were going to go to the Grotto, which is a Catholic place where they have a beautiful nativity. So we went to Pittock Mansion, and then for some reason, and that was in the days before GPS, and I had all mapped out, we decided to go to a different mall, which name has escaped me right now, but anyway, so we ended up on the other side of town. And so that was fine, except I didn't know how to get from there to the Grotto. And we were in this parking garage, and we had this green van, and I had girls in the car. And so this older lady pulled in, or came to get in her car that was right across from me. So I got out, and I said, can you tell me how to get to 82nd Street? And she said, well, do you know where such and such is? And I said, no. Do you know this? No. She went through like 3 or 4 things. And I said, no. And she said, well, just get in your car and I'll take you there. And I said, well, is that where you're going? Is that the way you're going? And she said, it doesn't matter. And so we got in the car and we followed her and turned here and turned there. And she got to 82nd Street and she pointed, that I turned left and she turned right. And I thought it was such a wonderful lesson to me and to the girls that she was just being kind. She was going out of her way. She didn't know me. She'd never see me again. She didn't have to do that. But it didn't matter. She just was a nice person. And so she didn't care to go out of her way. And the Grotto was a wonderful experience for the girls. It was beautiful. And so that's probably my best young women's story. We had a house in Albany that we'd lived in for 36 years that Dean built. So it was a huge yard and lots of flower beds, and it was getting to the point where Dean couldn't get up and trim the shrubs, or shouldn't, and Dustin was having to drive into town and do stuff, and I just thought it was time that we didn't have that big yard. And so Keisha said, well, why don't you move in with us? And I didn't want to move in with anybody, and well, why don't you? So we thought maybe we'd build on their property, which is outside of town, and it wasn't quite big enough, and so we decided to put a manufactured home on there. So that's what we did. So we're about, 18 miles out of town, 17 or 18 miles out of town. We'd been in the same ward in Albany we were in Albany for 42 years, I think, so we'd been in that same ward. Well, and it had split off, but for a long time. So it was a scary thing to move, but it's been good. I think we help them and they help us. So sometimes I'll pick up the boys and take them here or there, or I'll check on them, and they fix stuff for us, or Dustin will lift things that we can't lift, and so it's been a good thing. I wanted to make some friends, and they had a quilting group, and I sewed, but I've never quilted before. And I don't hand quilt. I piece things together, and then there's someone I pay to quilt it. Or I have a friend that does some freebies once in a while. But we meet Monday mornings from 9:30 to noon, most every Monday, and people come. For a while, the missionaries were doing some, and they would take a quilt home with them. And then this new mission president didn't want them doing that. But we have probably from 3 to 6 or 7 come. So sometimes there's like 8, and that's, whoa, there's a lot of people there. But I do it in my spare time, and I enjoy it, and I just give them to my kids. They probably don't want any anymore, but anyway, I just give them away, and it's fun. Enjoy it. I don't know why I made chickens a category, but so we have chickens, and I've never really had chickens before, but I like these chickens, and I'm nice to them, so I buy some little seeds. I mean, they have their chicken food, but I buy usually some wild bird seed, and every day I go in there, I give them a few seeds, and so they follow me around. If they're outside of their coop and I'm outside, they'll just trail me, like all of them will just follow me down the path or across the grass or wherever. And they're just cute. When they look at you, they just tip your head because their eyes are on the side of their head. So I guess that's the only way they can see. And they just look at you, and I just wish people think they're not smart, but I think they're smart. They know when I come in, they're probably going to get a treat. So if I walk into the chicken coop and they're around, they just all start to come. So I grew up in the church. From the time I was, I think, probably a year and a half, I remember sitting in church and looking at the veins in my mother's hands and stuff, and the songs we sang. And in those days, we'd go to Sunday school in the morning and then go home and then have sacrament in the afternoon. And primary was on a different day, and Relief Society was on a different day. And the church has scaled that down a lot, so there's not near as many meetings, but it really has formed my life and my values. And I just see I just think there's so many. Since my dad was an alcoholic, I think there was a good chance if I had started drinking, I would have ended up the same way he did. I see with working in alternative education, these kids that have such hard lives because of the choices their parents make and the choices that they are making too, which are not, some of them, not good choices. And I'm so grateful that I have the values that I have from the church, which keeps us safe, which keeps us connected with our family and keeps us away from harmful substances and immorality. And I'm thankful for my Savior and what he went through for us, and for the apostles that wrote the Book of Mormon scriptures and the New Testament scriptures and the Old Testament scriptures, and the advice and counsel that are in those scriptures that helps make life so much easier and helps us so that we can return to our Heavenly Father. I know. So let me tell you one more story. I don't know, maybe 6 years ago or so, I was sitting in the back of the chapel in Albany, and when I looked up, there was a father coming in, a tall man with a little girl in front of him, and his arms were under her, his hands were and arms were under her armpits. So I thought, I wonder if she's disabled and he's helping her walk, or whether she just doesn't want to go to sacrament meeting and she's and he's making her. But anyway, I was just curious about that. So I was sitting there, and midway through the meeting, he got up and took her out, and I could tell that she was disabled. It looked like she had cerebral palsy. And the first thought that came into my mind was, those poor parents will be saddled with her for her whole life. You know, she'll probably never grow up and get married, and they'll have to take care of her. And I don't know if you want to call it a vision, but I saw the other side. And I saw this tall man standing there, and this young girl run up and threw her arms around her dad and thank him for everything he had done for her here on earth. And I realized that it wasn't a burden. It was a blessing. And it also made me know that there is another side, that there is life after death. That when I go, in not too many years, that my mom will be there. And Papa, and my grandpa, and my friends. And people and relatives that I don't even know will be there. And I know that this life is just a little test, a training ground, so to speak, and we have choices to make, and sometimes we make good ones and sometimes we don't. But it's just like little children. You don't condemn them forever when they make a wrong choice, because we love them. Our Heavenly Father, our Savior, loves us. He expects us to do our best and to try, but He'll cover the rest of it. So I know that I will be there, and that I'll see my family here again, and I'll see my family there when I get there. And I will leave this testimony in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.